Welcome to the MCAT Basics Podcast, brought to you by the physicians at Med School Coach. Each week, Sam Smith breaks down high-yield MCAT topics so you can score as high as possible on test day.
Welcome to a bonus episode of MCAT Basics. I'm joined by Dr. Luke Maxfield, who is a graduate of Lake Erie Osteopathic School of Medicine. He is currently a dermatology resident, and we're going to talk a little bit about the osteopathic experience. So, first of all, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Looking forward to it.
So, the first thing I wanted to ask you about was, lately, have you been getting more questions about kind of what it means to be a DO?
Probably less.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think less because, especially with the merger. So for anyone who just doesn't know, there's like a merger. I think it took effect 2020 or maybe even, it's finalized at this point, I suppose.
Yeah.
Where we have one accrediting body. But for the last probably 5 or 10 years, I think DOs have been much more in the public space. I think there's even been some controversy about the president's physician also being a DO.
Yeah.
But that's like a recurring theme. And I honestly think in the professional world, everybody's kind of familiar with the presence. And honestly, we're a lot more numerous than as a group, I think, than we were probably 25 years ago. So it's for the general public, there are a lot of different providers out there now altogether. And so I think degrees are actually altogether not as face forward as they used to be. And so I think I'm getting just less questions from every front, whether general public or from other professionals.
Sure. Yeah. We got, one of our pages on perspectivedoctor.com is, kind of describes the differences between MD and DO. And right after everything with the president's physician, like it went from maybe 100 page views a day to like 10,000. So that's why I'm asking, like literally like 100x difference there. So it was kind of crazy.
That's actually pretty funny.
Yeah. It's kind of silly, but it's like, it is a little bit funny.
Yeah, but it's fair. I always think that's like a very fair question. I'm a pretty candid person, so I'll be pretty upfront with people, especially on a personal level about things, about that degrees.
Yeah. So let's start there. So kind of, maybe give me a little background on your background in medicine, but kind of why you chose DO, then maybe we can get into the differences between MD and DO.
Yeah. So my background is I didn't see a doctor consistently until I was probably, I think, 20 years old. Medicine was just like not a part of my life. And then I got meningitis, aseptic or viral probably, since I'm still here without any problems. But, I honestly, at that point, I'd only seen kind of, the alternative provider field. And I remember I'd just kind of been around, like seeing people, no one really knew what was going on. I just felt super sick. My neck was super stiff. And then, as soon as I walked into the ER, because it just got that bad, within 5 seconds, oh yeah, you have meningitis, and something clicked with me then. There was a lot of value in being able to have like a very factual knowledge base and to have something reproducible. And it was at that point that I kind of started looking into medicine altogether. So like I'm 20 years old, right? And I'm just now turning the pages into getting into the sphere of like being a medical professional. And so at that point, I had already gone through junior college probably for 5 years, just kind of burning time, doing everything I wanted to do in life. And so I took an atypical route to going into medicine. I had a huge sandbag of average GPAs. And so with that, I think the DO applicant is either one, coming from a more holistic alternative background where they feel like the chiropractic kind of skill set, the manipulative skill set that the DO schools do still teach, is something they would want to incorporate into their practice, or they like the idea of kind of having a more holistic mindset. And so they funnel that way, or they're kind of a non-traditional applicant where, where they're coming from a different background. And, in all candor, like historically becoming a DO has been easier than becoming an allopathic physician. And so I think you kind of have that route. Now, I think that's changing. And I've pulled a lot of data actually to kind of take a look at where that stands now.
Sure.
But I think those are the two spheres. And for me personally, it was like a combination of both. Like my background, I never saw a doctor. I only saw kind of that alternative sphere. And I was like, okay, I liked some of what they have to offer. And obviously this natural side of medicine is becoming huge today. That's this complementary and alternative medicine is one of the most prevalent sources that people are looking for in their healthcare. And so for me, it just kind of made sense to couple that with what I found to be like factual Western medicine and try to marry that. And then also too, like I had, again, just like baggage of GPA, where if I had gone to school for like 10 more years, my GPA wouldn't budge. I just had so many credits. And so
I see.
Traditionally, like the applicants are like, they're either their GPA is just a little bit less than an MD applicant, or their MCAT was like a little bit less. Again, I don't necessarily think that's quite holding as true anymore. But
Yeah, what does that look like now? Do you have it in front of you right now?
I actually do. Nice. I've got a lot of notes here. I was ready because I think this is interesting. Right. Yeah. So like I'm in a competitive specialty. I'm actually a competitive person by nature. And so I like to learn, like to practice with a little chip on my shoulder to be the best that I can be. I don't want to see how as a profession, like we're stacking up. So there's some really nice sites out there that just kind of put this up side by side. And let's see here. And it ranks all of the U.S. medical schools based off of their GPA, average GPA of college students or whatever prospective medical students coming in, and then also their MCAT scores.
Okay.
And so if you organize it by list, the averages aren't that different. Like I think the averages for both schools are above a 3.4, and then there are individual schools that fall like at 3.4, 3.5 across both specialties. And then both schools boast scores as high as a GPA of like an average GPA for the accepted students of 3.7. But when you stratify it, the DOs I think are like more like a 3.5 or 3.6, and then the MD is like 3.6, 3.7. So it's really close.
So there's a mixture. So the top, the top 10% DO schools, where do you think that would fit with like the medical schools? The DO schools fit with the MD schools. So right. Where would the top 10 DO schools fit amongst the MD schools?
So it's interesting because, if we just stratify it purely based off of MCAT scores and GPA, they're probably there's a couple DO programs in Texas and some other locations that really do boast some good numbers. And so I think they fall within like the top 25 of all together schools in the country. And there's only like 37 DO schools. So they fall within the top 25 probably programs across the country altogether as far as how they rank in their objective GPAs and board scores.
But at the same time, GPA and MCAT score probably doesn't mean that much for being a doctor. So this actually brings me to my next question is, what are some of the differences you've noticed between yourself being a DO and MDs? I'm sure there's some in your residency program. Are there anything that you can really pick out and say, wow, this is something I learned during my DO training?
So anecdotally, and something that I think something I think they often kind of talk about within the osteopathic sphere is because so much of our training in our first 2 years is hands-on, like manipulative medicine. I feel, we're told, and I actually think this is anecdotally true, that we're very comfortable being around people, and like, it's not, and I guess, with the physical exam portion of medicine, just talking to people, putting a hand on their shoulder, just being there physically and communicating with them. Now, of course, that's extremely anecdotal, extremely subjective. And but I think that is something that does correlate just because of how much of our early years are spent hands-on. Now, as far as like how it's actually practiced and what it actually looks like, there's almost no distinguishing difference in most specialties. In the allopathic students, I don't know. There's just it's a very, very blended line at this point.
Yeah, I feel I might be shooting into the dark with this, but I feel like most of your training probably comes in, your residency and maybe in your third and fourth years of school, where it's basically the same thing. I guess is it the same all 4 years except for the manipulation part of it?
Right. Yeah. So for most programs, and there are some variations with this, but the first 2 years of medical school will usually be purely academic. And so obviously you're pretty much at your institution just doing whatever curriculum they have in place. And so it's during that time that, the DO would have their own unique academic experience where they are doing manipulation and osteopathic principles, tenets, and a lot of like anatomy and physiology, the musculoskeletal anatomy and physiology. But yeah, after that, third year, fourth year of medical school, residencies years 1 through 9, it's all combined and under a joint accrediting body. And so I think at that point, I mean, the majority of your training is done jointly.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about these manipulations that you've been talking about. Kind of what is that? What does that look like?
It looks like chiropractics.
Okay.
So, I mean, just for everybody who's like even considering what is this at all, it's very much like chiropractics, because so osteopathic medicine was started by an MD in the 1890s, and it would be a shame, I think, for everybody if I didn't know the exact year. It is 1892. So A.T. Stills, he was a medical doctor, and he made this offshoot of medicine at the time where there really wasn't a lot of science-based anything probably. And so one of his focus and tenets was that basically the function of the body was reciprocally based with the structure. And so we look in that area of our scope as to like a lot of physiologic problems, especially musculoskeletal, can stem from some sort of axial problem. Basically, your bones can cause problems in your muscles and the rest of your body. And so there's like the somatic relationship between our organs and then the structure of our body. And so the manipulations are targeting the structure of the body to try to have some end response elsewhere. And I personally feel like that kind of is in line with more modern day chiropractics as well, where they're, we'll adjust necks, similar maneuvers, not exact same, but very similar maneuvers as a traditional chiropractor would do. We'll adjust the spine, the back, whether it's high velocity techniques where you get that traditional like crack and pop, or whether it's like fascial release, effleurage, soft tissue manipulation. So it's kind of a spectrum, but it's anywhere from massage to chiropractics.
Now, I'm assuming that, do you use it for derm, or is there specialties? Is there specialties that use it more than others?
Yeah, there's definitely specialties where it's more amenable to using your osteopathic skill set. So for dermatology, it's like kind of like a thoughtful response in that, yeah, sure, you could theoretically, use it to manipulate lymphatics because, lymphatics are intimately involved with the skin and some of the disease processes therein. But realistically, the majority of the dermatologic scope is not going to be using the osteopathic scope. Whereas like family practice, they really have a really nice opportunity to use something like that, where instead of, going to see your chiropractor and going to see your doctor, you get to see your doctor who does chiropractics, and he's trained in the scope of pharmacy and also even like basic surgery.
Right. So when you're applying to residency programs, is it through the same application process or that's what's being combined, right?
Correct. Yeah. So historically there have been, so
you go ahead.
All right. So it's kind of been one-sided in that DOs had their own residency programs historically that they could apply to, and they could apply to the MD allopathic programs. MDs, however, could only apply to the allopathic programs. And so the DOs had this nice like pool that wasn't big enough to fill their spots probably, but a nice pool of residency spots, and they could apply to MD spots. But now, yes, it's all combined. And so the application process is exactly the same. You're using the same electronic bodies and organizations to which you're submitting your application, and it just funnels to everybody.
How do you think that's going to affect residencies for DOs and MDs? Will there be any changes now that it's combined? Overall, do you see anything happening?
Not directly. So, and the reason I say that is because, the only side that would change based off of the logic of having been one-sided before is the MDs might have access to spots they wouldn't have had otherwise. Now, with that being said, there are just very few DO spots anyways. So like for dermatology, we're talking like 30 programs. So it's a competitive specialty. And so MDs will have access to those small subset of programs that they didn't anyway. But it probably won't be meaningful as far as who's gonna match and go where between the groups.
At Med School Coach, we know that studying for the MCAT exam can be challenging. especially for busy students on the go. That's why our team created MCAT Prep, the only all-encompassing study app built specifically for the MCAT. MCAT Prep by Med School Coach provides student access to extremely high-quality content and a personalized curriculum for free. The app has more than 250 videos, 1,000 flashcards, and 1,000 unique MCAT questions. Plus, MCAT Prep by Med School Coach allows students to create a personalized study schedule and track progress over time. You need every competitive advantage you can get to get into medical school, and now you can put the experts from Med School Coach into your pocket. It's the closest pre-med students can come to a personal tutor without spending a penny. Download MCAT Prep by Med School Coach for free at medschoolcoach.com/MCAT. Or download it directly from the Apple Store or Google Play Store. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and MCAT Prep by Med School Coach can help.
So in terms of residency programs, then we'll just talk about kind of the old system. When you were applying to residencies, and I guess you don't have the opposite experience to really compare this to, but would you say it is more competitive, less competitive, the same competitiveness as, applying to an MD residency program?
That's a great question. We always kind of thought about that within our own sphere. And so it probably is, in that if you're talking about a competitive specialty, you're probably taking from the same percentile of applicants. If it was purely DO and MDs totally split, I think you would probably be taking from like the upper 5 percentile of DOs into a particular competitive specialty that would have traditionally been an osteopathic residency. Where similarly, I think in the MD pool, you would probably be pulling from the same percentile of applicants into that competitive specialty. It would just be a larger number because there were just more of them.
Oh, I see. Right. And you said there's 37?
I think there's 37 DO schools.
Okay. How many MD schools are there? There's like more than 100, obviously.
Yeah. I actually don't know that one. I didn't look that one up, but there's definitely more than 100.
Yeah, I'm not even going to look it up. I bet it's somewhere north of 150 if I had to guess.
It's a fair guess.
So there's this news that, step 1 might go pass fail. It's not confirmed, I don't think. I don't really know. It seems a little bit like a black hole.
No, I think is it
confirmed?
Not only confirmed, but it's taking place soon. It's going to be implemented here soon.
It is?
If not this year. It's very where is it? What year is it? 2020, 2021, maybe next year?
Okay. So with that said, then go ahead.
No, once they committed to this thing. It surprised me because there was a lot of rumor and talk about this before it happened. And so I was like, oh, this is interesting. Let's pay attention to this. And so, I thought, maybe they'll meet in the middle and stratify into quartiles. Like, okay, so you don't want people to have a score. So maybe you'll stratify them based off of their quartile and then a fail group. But they really just committed and went pass fail. And that was a big step and a big move.
Yeah. So how's that going to affect residency applications?
So, okay, of the questions you sent me, when I saw this, I thought, whoa, he asked this question, because this is actually a huge deal, especially if this is only the first step in the direction of medicine. And so I always start this topic off with this caveat, and that I think it was well-intentioned, in that I think their goals were probably twofold. And I know they've made some statements to kind of talk about why they did this, but one of this was to kind of alleviate the burden and stress and pressure of having an initial scored test. And then two, I think partly also push more emphasis onto the clinical skill set, because I think there may be some questions to whether the basic sciences correlate as well to how you're going to perform as like your step 2, which is a more clinically based test.
Okay.
And so, I'll always give them the benefit of the doubt. And I know this was probably in response to a lot of people's desires. They wanted this to move past fail, and so people responded in kind. But the implications of this are multifactorial. And here's some data to like support my thought process here.
Yeah.
So the last program director survey that I could find was the 2018 program director survey. And so this is when they asked program directors, okay, what's important to you? What are you looking for in your prospective residents, the people you're going to be interviewing and accepting into your residency program? Because for a doctor, this is everything. Like, your scope of practice is determined by your residency. Mm-hmm. And so this was broken into multiple parts. The two I'll focus on are: 1, what's important for who they're going to interview, and then 2, what's important for how they're going to rank people who they have already interviewed. So basically, you get a pool of people you interview, And then you rank them in a matter of like, 1 through 15. 1 is the person I want the most, 15 is the person I want, but they're just 15. So when you're selecting who you're going to interview, the most important things in descending order, were the USMLE 1 COMLEX 1, then letters of recommendation, then a dean's letter, and then the USMLE 2 COMLEX 2. And so that's who they're going to interview. Now, once you've interviewed, then they take other factors into consideration. So after you've made the interview, then their list looks like this: personal interactions, interpersonal skills, feedback from residents, USMLE 1, letters of rec, and USMLE 2.
Interesting.
And so a consistent thing is that the objective measure that you would have, other than just like letting them get to know you, is the USMLE 1. And so if you lose that opportunity to put something out there, like a strong board score, kind of as a reflection, hopefully, of 1, your capacity, and 2, your work ethic, then it's going to fall to either your USMLE 2, and that's okay. That's fine. That's still an objective measure you can put a lot into, and a lot of people rely heavily on this to shine. Like this, they want this to be part of their resume that really makes them stand out. If they don't go to a prestigious school, if they don't have connections with high-profile people from which they can get a letter of recommendation, or a high-profile dean where they can get a strong letter of recommendation with name recognition. So the USMLE 2 would still be there, but a lot of people will score okay on one and score excellent on another. So if you have one test now, it really puts a lot of pressure on this one test. So now everybody has the USMLE 2. That's your one shot. There's no forgiveness. Like you can't improve. You can't go up from there to try to prove yourself. And so let's say that, yeah, it is. It's a lot of pressure for people. So while I think they're trying to take pressure off the front end, I think they inadvertently put pressure on the second test. But even more than that, let's say the USMLE 1 still pass fail, because a lot of your letters of recommendation are going to be coming from within your institution, especially because you're getting them in the first 2 years or some of them from your first 2 years, or your program affiliated hospitals, which is going to be a large part of your third year of medical school. The strength of your letters of recommendation, at least in like name recognition, high profile figures, is probably going to be based off of where you go to medical school. And so then a lot of pressure actually gets shifted to the MCAT now too. And I know there's actually been a big push to kind of like, let these applicants do a year of life before they come into medical school. Do they really need to be doing volunteer work and getting letters of recommendation like during middle school? But they inadvertently shifted actually more pressure to people at a younger age, because going to a good medical school is going to mean a lot now.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then, the last part of that I wanted to say is something called audition rotations. So an audition rotation is you spend time rotating as a medical student at a place you would probably like to go. And it's usually done at a remote site. Let's say I'm based out of Texas and I want to go to UCLA in California. So I would take, let's say, 2 weeks to a month to fly to UCLA to work in their hospital system, get to know people within the program. And that's a way people compensate for, not compensate, that's the way that people kind of complement their application to get some of these other features, to get people to know your face, know how you interact with them, get an idea of your interpersonal skills, and get to know the residents of the program. Because that's going to be very important, especially without a USMLE 1. Now, a problem is, if you don't have these objective markers, so much emphasis, especially if you're not at a high profile place, is going to be placed on your relationships with people. Not like that they're going to take you because they like personally care about you or it's some intimate relationship, but because they know you as a person and they believe that you have something to offer as a person into their program. And so I think a lot of people are going to actually spend a lot more of their effort and monetary investment into these audition rotations, and they are expensive. I did those on the dermatology trail. I mean, if you think about living out of a hotel or a VRBO for like a month on end for one institution,
sounds horrible. Sounds very horrible.
That's another downside. So
interesting. I'd almost rather have. It sounds like you would too. I'd almost rather have like an objective score that I could put all my time and focus into, and like work really hard and get a great, step one score, then I guess you can do the other things through hard work, but it just doesn't seem quite that way. Is that right?
Yeah, it was something somewhat predictable. It's like a test. If you put in the work on the back end, if you're consistent over the year, you can probably expect a decent score, and you hope that it reflects the effort you put in. The thing that I think a lot of these programs didn't like is, and it's true, we would, as prospective applicants, be spending a lot of our time during our clinical rotations just wanting to read. Like, we just want to study for the test. Like, we're less invested in what's going on in front of us, and we're more invested in what's going on in a book, which is actually a really big downside. But there is definitely inherent value in having some sort of objective marker, I think, especially for someone like a DO whose program is either newer or doesn't have any name recognition, or for an international medical graduate who's coming in and is really wanting to just drop a bomb, put something down on paper that's just emphatic.
Right. It's like really it's like if you have a low GPA, right, and you're trying to get into medical school. One way to do that is to kill the MCAT and, get in the 95th percentile. And now if you took the MCAT away, it seems like it limits people, but I guess there's pluses and minuses to both of those things. So,
yeah.
At Med School Coach, we know that getting into medical school is hard. In fact, 60% of pre-meds who apply to a medical school don't even get accepted. And if you want to get accepted into a top medical school, it's even harder. That's why more students than ever are turning to MCAT Tutoring by Med School Coach. Our tutors are all 99th percentile scorers, have been through rigorous training, and can help raise your MCAT score by 12 points or more. You need every competitive advantage you can get to get into med school, so why not get one-on-one tutoring from Med School Coach? Our expert team will create a custom program just for you and help you master MCAT content where you need the help most. You'll raise your MCAT score. We guarantee it. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach MCAT tutoring package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.
All right, so let me just bring it back to DO here.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell a student who's trying to figure out whether they want to apply to a DO school, whether they want to apply to an MD school, and just, is trying to figure out what they want to do? What would you tell them?
All right, so this is like an amazing question, because it's kind of difficult. Because the question is like, really, like I think you laid out before me, was just like, why would you pick a DO school? Like, what circumstance would you want to pick a DO school selectively? And so I think then you have to consider, does being a DO provide you benefits over being an MD? And I would say if that skill set, the osteopathic, like manipulative skill set, isn't something you actually want to apply, then it may not. We do tend, or at least historically, have been more holistic in our approach. But I think Western medicine is making the same move kind of reactively as society wants. And so I don't necessarily know, other than the skill set, if it provides you anything beneficial that you would select it over an MD program. And then the other side of it is does it limit you?
Yeah.
So does going to a DO school limit your ability to do the specialty you want to do, or even match at all? So I took a look at some more numbers just because I wanted to have some like strong objective data for us.
Seems like you're a numbers guy.
I'm a fact guy.
Fact guy. Okay. I like that.
Yeah. So the 2020 NRMP data, they took a look at the MD applicants, and right now we're just going to talk about match rate overall. So look, not everybody who graduates medical gets to do a residency. Believe it or not, after like 4 years of hard work, not everybody actually gets to move on initially or right away. And so for the MDs, out of 18,000 plus medical students, 93.7% matched into their first year position of residency. And then for DOs, 90.7% of the students matched into residency programs. And so you're looking at 93.7 and 90.7. I'd be willing to bet that's not statistically significant. Definitely didn't worry about running that. But I think realistically, if you're going to be trying to match into a residency program, it's probably not going to limit you into getting into a residency program in general. Now, the other side of that is it going to limit your options into getting into a competitive specialty? And that's a little harder to really look at objectively, because then you get into like, well, how are you going to stratify a competitive specialty? Like, I don't want to I don't want to make other specialties look less desirable because I'm saying they're not competitive. uh, but I think the reality of the matter is it probably would limit you a little bit, because historically a lot of the competitive specialties, they do want to take someone with a nice pedigree, whether it's a pedigree in research, a pedigree, coming from a program with a nice history of strong physicians coming out of there. And as a DO, you do have to kind of have something to prove. You need to put something down on paper or personally that's going to resonate with people, and so you may find yourself in somewhat of an uphill battle, at least in the near future, going to competitive specialties. But it's definitely not at all a limiting factor. Like just this year in the dermatology world, I feel like, again, this is anecdote, but I saw so many people going into traditionally allopathic dermatology programs, and I think again we're just kind of getting to a point where we're just kind of like physicians as opposed to like osteopaths and allopaths, and there's a little bit more camaraderie there and just like recognition than I think there was with previous generations.
Sure. So this last question, I don't know how interested my crowd is going to be in this, because my podcast is an MCAT podcast, but hopefully most of the people listening to it will eventually make it into medical school. And, what if you're starting to take this step one or study for this step one, and at this point it'll be pass fail, but you're starting to fail on it. I know you're a tutor for USMLE Step 1, right? Is that right?
Yeah, 1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3. Okay. So maybe talk briefly about what you do for tutoring and kind of, what a tutor session looks like with you.
Okay, yeah, you bet. First off, like goals wise, never make it your goal to not fail. Then you're gonna fail. You're gonna be that person who failed. So don't be that person. On the same like program director application of the thing, or program director survey of the things that like have the most negative impact in their eyes, one of them, of course, is like failing your boards. It's not like it's not gonna screw you over for life. It's not like you're never gonna be a doctor. You can definitely pass it, take it again, and get a residency spot. But it really does carry a lot of weight. So you want to overshoot.
Okay.
Like you want to go in thinking you're going to be the 90th percentile, and then at worst you fall to 50th, and who cares at that point?
Yeah.
You were comfortable. So set your goals high. But as far as tutoring, when I meet with a person for the first time, I get an idea of where they're at. Like, what are your goals? What does your life look like right now? Are we trying to get you out of a hole that you're in? Are we trying to set you up for success? Are you like a rock star who just wants to be even better? And so I get an idea of what they are doing. And then I kind of look at what they're preparing for, what their weaknesses are, and then what resources they're using. So there are like a million resources. We live in an information-rich world, and it carries over into medicine. So I just take a look at the resources. It usually ends up being like, you probably don't need to buy more. You just need to kind of focus in on a couple. There's a ton of good ones. And then we build a schedule out. So I actually have like a Monday through Sunday schedule that I set up for people on an hourly basis. Like, you're going to dedicate this time to reading, this time questions, this time for something called sketchy pick mnemonic, where it's like just visual recognition for like medicines and infectious disease.
It's like they're mnemonics, right?
No, they're pictures.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's like a picture.
Like visual mnemonics. Okay.
Yeah, I guess so. Something you close your eyes and you see.
Yeah. Someone was telling me about this. Like, there's one where for a salmonella bacteria, I don't know, there's a plate and a picture of a lemon or something, and you're supposed to remember that something with acid. I don't know. Anyways, so someone was telling me about that, but continue.
Yeah, well, actually, I found I learn really well that way. So I'm a very visual learner.
Okay.
But yeah, that's my kind of thing. I love it. Anyway, so we set up that schedule, look at your resources. How are you allocating your time? I try to build in a rest day for everybody, because look, you're about to, for prospective medical students, you're about to embark in like an 8 to 10 to plus year journey. Like, this is your life. You have to have a life while you're doing this, in as much as possible. And you can definitely do all the work you need to do outside of clinical duties in like 6 days. So try to teach them how to have a balanced life, how to get their schedule going, map out what their schedule look like. And then that's number one. So after that, we'll catch up in a week or so, touch base, see if they met their goals, make adjustments. And then from there, we go into like either topical things where they'll ask me, okay, I need to learn about the heart. Okay, let's talk about the heart for an hour. And we just talk about the physiology, the diseases, the treatment. Or we'll do questions together. Like, are we game planning for the test now? And then we'll just open up a question. I'll see their train of thought. I'll have them verbalize it. I'll try to highlight things that they're either doing or could do quicker, better, or features that they missed. And then we'll look at the discussion for the answer. We'll talk about that. I'll try to add in some snippets that weren't talked about in the answer discussion. And I think that's really like most of what I do.
Okay. Do you expect to do more step 2 tutoring now?
Yeah, the majority of my time is spent in step 2 tutoring.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Honestly, because just like I said about the basic test, like step 1, it's very basic science heavy. And so even though I 100% believe that is like the foundation of knowledge for a physician, like that's one thing that separates us is we can think of things from the cellular level through like the whole human body grossly functioning as a system. Mm-hmm. You really don't apply as much of those basic science things. And so the step 2 stuff, which is clinically based and on, I feel like that's a lot easier to recall and to continue to add on to because it's you use it more often.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, you got anything else? I think I've exhausted all my questions.
No, I mean, for everyone who's out there like watching this, wanting to become a doctor, there is probably nothing to very few things in life that can be more fulfilling. So anyone who's like willing to take up this commitment and responsibility, I'm super passionate about helping them get there because it is just a privilege to be a part of something like this. Where you're interacting with people in an extremely meaningful way. Even in my specialty, it makes a big difference for people very visibly and even right in front of me. So, just keep with it, stick with it. You have to have a goal in mind and see it through.
Yeah. So. Well, thanks. Well, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Each episode of MCAT Basics is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access Med School Coach services, including MCAT tutoring and medical school admissions advising, visit our website at medschoolcoach.com. Good luck as you prepare for the MCAT, and we hope you tune in again next time.